My daughter faked having terminal cancer. For a year, I wept, I prayed, I drained my life savings to fund her treatments, while she and her husband secretly lived a life of luxury. They thought I was just a grieving, foolish old mother. They didn't know I was about to plan her fake funeral, and let the truth prevail. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Francine Butler, and at 67, I had cultivated a life of quiet order. 40 years as an insurance claims adjuster had taught me the value of diligence, of reading the fine print, of understanding that behind every claim, every number lay a human story. I was good at my job. I could spot a fraudulent claim from a mile away, a padded expense, a story that didn't quite add up. My late husband, David, used to say I had a sixth sense for deceit. It was a skill that had served me well in my career, but one I had foolishly, naively believed I could retire when it came to my own family. My only child, Danielle, and her husband, Terrell, were the center of my world since David passed. Danielle, at 39, was bright and charismatic, though she'd always had a taste for things just beyond her reach, a restless ambition that her husband, Terrell, seemed to encourage. Terrell, at 41, was smooth, charming, a man who could sell sand in the desert, his words always more substantial than his actual achievements. I loved them both, but a quiet, persistent worry had taken root in my heart in recent years. Their finances always seemed to be in a state of chaotic flux, their lifestyle a little too lavish for their reported income. I had, on more than one occasion, dipped into my own carefully managed retirement savings to help them with a short-term loan or an unexpected bill. Then came the day they arrived at my door with faces etched with a grief so profound, so terrifying, it made my own heart stop. They sat me down in my living room, the same room where Danielle had taken her first steps. Danielle was weeping, her head buried in Terrell's shoulder. Terrell, his own eyes red-rimmed, held up a sheaf of medical-looking documents. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking with a performance worthy of the stage. "There's no easy way to say this. It's Danielle." He explained, in a torrent of confusing, terrifying medical jargon, that my daughter, my vibrant, beautiful daughter, had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of cancer. The documents he showed me were a blur of lab results and intimidating letterheads, things I would have once scrutinized with a professional, dispassionate eye, but which now, in the face of my daughter's supposed mortality, seemed utterly, horribly real. "The doctors, they say her chances are not good, Francine," Terrell continued, using my first name, a subtle shift that made him sound more like a co-conspirator in my grief than my son-in-law. "But there is one hope. An experimental treatment program. A clinic in Switzerland that has had some incredible results. But our insurance, they called it investigational. They won't cover it." Danielle looked up at me then, her face a mask of tragic, tear-streaked beauty. "Mama," she whispered, her voice a hoarse, desperate plea. "I don't want to die." In that moment my world shattered. My daughter, my only child, dying. The insurance adjuster in my brain, the part that would have questioned, that would have demanded to see the official denial of coverage, that would have scrutinized every line of those documents, simply switched off. All that was left was the mother. A mother whose child was facing a death sentence. "Whatever it takes, baby," I said, my own voice breaking as I rushed to her side, wrapping my arms around her trembling shoulders. "Whatever it costs. We will fight this together." The cost, Terrell explained with a grave, somber expression, was astronomical. Tens of thousands for the initial consultations and travel, hundreds of thousands for the treatment itself. It would take everything I had. My retirement fund, the savings I had so meticulously built over 40 years, the nest egg that was meant to see me through my own old age in quiet comfort. "Francine," Terrell said, taking my hand, his eyes shining with false sincerity, "we can't ask you to do that. It's too much. We'll find another way." "There is no other way," I said, my resolve hardening. "What good is money if I don't have my daughter? We will do it. We will drain every account, sell every stock. We will save her." That night my quiet, orderly life ended and a new one began. A life of frantic fundraising, of liquidating assets, of pouring every ounce of my financial security into the bottomless pit of my daughter's illness. I called my financial advisor the next morning and began the process of cashing in my retirement portfolio. He had urged caution, suggested a second opinion, but I wouldn't hear of it. Time, according to Terrell, was a luxury we did not have. Danielle and Terrell became the managers of my sacrifice. Terrell handled the logistics, the wire transfers to the Swiss clinic, the payments for the expensive, non-covered medications. Danielle played the part of the brave, suffering patient, her days filled with feigned fatigue, her head often wrapped in beautiful silk scarves to hide the hair loss that hadn't yet begun. I looked at my daughter, at her supposed bravery in the face of this terrible disease, and my heart ached with a love so fierce, so profound, it blinded me to everything else. I was Francine Butler, a retired insurance adjuster, a woman who had built a life on seeing the truth in the details. And I was being played in the most monstrous, most intimate, most heartbreaking con of my entire life. And I, the expert, saw nothing. The year that followed my daughter's diagnosis was a descent into a gray, exhausting world of perpetual crisis and financial hemorrhage. My life, once a predictable rhythm of gentle retirement, was now a frantic, non-stop effort to fund Danielle's courageous battle against cancer. The woman I had been, the sharp, pragmatic insurance adjuster, the careful planner, was completely subsumed by the all-consuming role of the terrified mother, willing to do anything, sacrifice everything to save her only child. My carefully built retirement fund, the product of 40 years of diligent work and prudent saving, began to vanish with terrifying speed. Terrell, my son-in-law, was the master of logistics in this tragic play. He would present me with official-looking invoices on heavy bond paper, embossed with the logos of far-flung clinics and pharmaceutical companies. "Francine," he'd say, his face a mask of weary concern, "the next round of treatment from the Geneva clinic is due. They need the wire transfer by Friday." Or, "The specialist in Germany has recommended a new immunotherapy drug. It's not approved here yet, so it's out of pocket, but he says it could be a game changer for Danielle." I never questioned him. How could I? To question the cost was to question the value of my daughter's life. I would go to the bank, my heart a leaden weight, and authorize another transfer, watching the numbers in my savings account dwindle, the foundation of my own security crumbling away. Danielle, for her part, was a brilliant actress. She played the part of the brave, tragic patient to perfection. Her life became a carefully curated performance of suffering. She would spend days in bed, her head wrapped in a series of elegant silk scarves, complaining of a fatigue so profound she could barely lift her head. She would recount, with a tearful, quavering voice, the grueling side effects of the latest experimental treatment. There were days she was full of a fragile, fighting hope, speaking of a good report from a doctor in another city. On other days she would be plunged into a despair so deep it terrified me, weeping in my arms, whispering that she didn't want to die, that she was so scared. I became her full-time caregiver, my own life, my friends, my hobbies, all fading into the background. My world shrank to the four walls of my small home, where she and Terrell had effectively moved in to be closer to me for support. The irony of that was a constant bitter taste in my mouth. Her treatments often required travel. Wellness retreats in Arizona for the dry air. A consultation with a holistic specialist in California. They would go, leaving me behind to worry and pray, their trips funded by another large withdrawal from my dwindling accounts. Danielle would post photos online, not of hospital rooms, but of serene landscapes, of beautiful, healthy-looking meals. Finding my strength in nature, she would caption them. Fighting every day. #CancerWarrior. The outpouring of sympathy from her online friends was immense. I, too, would look at those photos, my heart aching with love for her bravery, never once questioning the lack of medical equipment, of doctors, of any real evidence of a clinical setting. The financial bleed was relentless. My retirement portfolio was gone. Then went my emergency savings. I cashed in the last of my savings bonds, the ones I'd bought when Danielle was just a girl. Terrell and Danielle were always one step ahead of my depleted funds, always with a new, urgent demand. The clinic needs an advance for the next phase, Francine. Danielle's special dietary needs are incredibly expensive, but crucial for her immune system. I was exhausted emotionally and financially. My own health began to suffer under the strain. I stopped sleeping, my nights filled with a gnawing anxiety. I lost weight. My old friends from my bridge club would call, their voices full of concern. "Francine, you sound terrible. Are you taking care of yourself?" I'd brush off their worries, too ashamed to admit the truth, that I was pouring every last ounce of myself, every last penny I possessed, into a bottomless pit of medical expenses, and it still didn't seem to be enough. The year of treatment culminated in what Terrell grimly called the final option. A highly experimental, incredibly expensive stem cell therapy in a private clinic in Mexico. It would require the last of my significant assets, the money I had set aside from the sale of my larger family home after David died, the funds meant to ensure I could live in my small, comfortable condo for the rest of my days without a single financial worry. This was it, they said. Her last chance. I didn't hesitate. I authorized the transfer of the final, massive sum. It was everything I had left. I sat with Danielle the night before she and Terrell were due to leave for Mexico. She held my hand, her own feeling surprisingly warm and strong. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you for giving me a chance to live. I love you so much." "I love you too, my baby," I said, my own tears falling freely. "You just fight. You fight and you come back to me." The next morning they left. I stood at my window watching their taxi pull away, a profound sense of peace settling over me amidst the sorrow. I had done it. I had given everything, my entire life savings, my future security, every last penny. But I had given my daughter a chance to live. There was no greater sacrifice a mother could make and no greater love. The emptiness of my bank account felt in that moment like the fullness of my heart. I was a fool, a blind, loving fool, but I had done what any mother would do. And I had no idea that the greatest betrayal was yet to come. In the quiet, empty days that followed Danielle and Terrell's departure for the life-saving treatment in Mexico, a strange and unfamiliar stillness settled over my life. For the first time in over a year, there were no urgent calls for money, no dramatic health updates, no carefully managed performances of suffering to attend to. There was only the silence and the stark, terrifying reality of my own financial devastation. My life savings were gone. My retirement, the one I had so meticulously planned, had been sacrificed at the altar of my daughter's illness. All that remained was my small monthly pension, barely enough to cover my condo fees and groceries. I told myself it was worth it. Every penny. To save my only child. I clung to that thought like a prayer. But my mind, the mind of a retired insurance claims adjuster, a mind trained for 40 years to find order in chaos, to spot inconsistencies, to question every detail, could not stay quiet for long. It was a habit, a reflex, a part of my very being. And in the silence left by their absence, it began to stir. It started with a single, innocuous piece of paper. Terrell, in his haste to leave, had left a folder on my dining room table, a collection of the most recent invoices and receipts from Danielle's various treatments. He'd likely left it deliberately, a final piece of evidence of their supposed expenditures, a way to quell any lingering questions I might have. Most of the documents were from clinics and specialists I now knew by name, their letterheads familiar and, to my grief-stricken eyes, utterly convincing. But one invoice, the largest one for the experimental treatment at the Holistic Wellness Center in Arizona they had visited a few months prior, caught my eye. I had seen it before, of course, had authorized the wire transfer to pay it without a second thought. But now, in the calm, quiet light of my empty apartment, I looked at it not as a mother but as an adjuster. And I saw something. It was a tiny detail, something anyone else would have missed. A medical billing code at the bottom of the page, a string of numbers and letters. The code listed was for a routine dermatological procedure, something like a cosmetic laser treatment. But the charge beside it was for $15,000, and the description was for immunomodulatory therapy. The code and the description didn't match. It was like seeing a claim for a broken leg with the billing code for a common cold. A rookie mistake. A lazy forger's error. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drum of disbelief and dawning horror. It had to be a typo. A simple clerical error. It had to be. But the seed of my old professional suspicion, once planted, began to sprout with a terrifying speed. I looked closer at the invoice. The clinic's logo seemed a little blurry, as if it had been copied and pasted. The address was a P.O. box. The doctor's name, Dr. Alistair Finch, sounded vaguely familiar, like a character from an old novel. I felt a wave of nausea, my hands growing cold. I tried to push the thought away, to dismiss it as the paranoia of a grieving, stressed old woman. I felt a surge of guilt. How could I doubt my own suffering daughter, my son-in-law who was so diligently managing her care? But the instinct, the one that had made me the best claims adjuster in my department for 2 decades, was screaming at me. Something is wrong. This is not a legitimate claim. With a sense of dread so profound it felt like I was moving underwater, I went to my laptop. My fingers trembled as I typed the name of the Holistic Wellness Center into the search engine. The website that popped up was slick, professional, full of smiling, healthy-looking people and glowing testimonials. But as I clicked through the pages, I noticed something strange. The Contact Us page listed only the P.O. Box address. There was no physical street address, no phone number. I did a reverse image search on their state-of-the-art facility. The photo was a stock image of a modern office building in another state entirely. My breath hitched. The air in my apartment suddenly felt thin, cold. I then searched for Dr. Alistair Finch. There was no registered medical practitioner by that name in the entire state of Arizona. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. A terrible, elaborate mistake. Driven by a frantic, desperate need to disprove my own terrifying suspicions, I went back to the folder Terrell had left. I pulled out another invoice, this one from the private clinic in Germany. I searched for its name, its address. The clinic didn't exist. The address was a residential building in a suburb of Berlin. One by one I went through the documents. Each one, under the cold, unforgiving light of a simple internet search, dissolved into a fiction. The specialists, the clinics, the wellness retreats. They were all phantoms, elaborate creations designed to legitimize a monstrous, year-long fraud. The final, irrefutable proof came when I found the statement for a new credit card I hadn't known existed. A card apparently opened in my name for medical travel expenses. The charges weren't for clinics or pharmacies. They were for 5-star hotels in Las Vegas, for designer boutiques on Rodeo Drive, for first-class airline tickets to Hawaii. The wellness retreat in Arizona had been a spa weekend at a luxury resort. The specialist in Germany had been a shopping spree in Munich. My life savings. My entire future. It hadn't been spent on saving my daughter's life. It had been spent on funding her and Terrell's secret life of luxury, a life built on the foundation of the most monstrous lie I could possibly imagine. I sank to the floor, the fraudulent papers scattering around me like dead leaves. The grief for my daughter's illness was replaced by a new, more terrible grief, the grief for her soul. She wasn't just sick, she was a monster. My love, my sacrifice, my every waking moment of fear and prayer for the past year, it had all been a game to her, a long con. The claims adjuster in me, the part that had been dormant for so long, awoke with a vengeance. The emotional, heartbroken mother was gone, replaced by a woman who had just uncovered the biggest, most personal fraud of her entire career. My fury was a cold, quiet, and terrifying thing. I would not let them get away with this. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my empathy for gullibility. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My investigation had just begun. And my final claim, the one I was about to file against them, would be for everything they had. The days following my horrifying discovery were a study in cold, controlled fury. The heartbroken mother was gone, her grief and love packed away in a dark, quiet corner of my soul. In her place stood the insurance claims adjuster, the woman who had spent 40 years meticulously documenting lies, untangling webs of deceit, and bringing fraudulent claims to their logical, often legal, conclusion. My daughter Danielle and my son-in-law Terrell had perpetrated a fraud of monstrous proportions. And I, Francine Butler, was now building the case against them brick by damning brick. My small, quiet apartment transformed into an investigative command center. I retrieved my old work briefcase from the back of the closet, its familiar worn leather a strange comfort. I began to organize the evidence with the methodical precision of my old profession. The fake invoices from non-existent clinics. The credit card statements detailing their lavish spending sprees, all disguised as medical expenses. I created a timeline, a spreadsheet cross-referencing their claimed treatments with their actual luxury travel. My professional instincts, once dormant, were now razor-sharp. I knew that my own testimony, my own collection of papers, might not be enough. They would call me a liar, a confused old woman twisting my grief into a narrative of senility. I needed more. I needed external, undeniable proof. I needed to become my own private investigator. My first step was to discreetly hire one. Not a flashy, expensive firm, but a quiet, retired police detective named Marcus Thorne, a man whose reputation for tenacity and discretion I had heard of through my old professional circles. I met him in a quiet coffee shop far from my neighborhood, laying out the core of my story, showing him just enough of the fraudulent documents to prove I wasn't a rambling, paranoid old woman. He listened, his craggy face grim, his eyes sharp. He took the case, his fee paid from the last few $1,000s I had managed to salvage before they drained everything. While Marcus began his work, tracing the digital and financial footprints of Danielle and Terrell, I conducted my own, more personal investigation. I started with their friends, the ones who had offered me such cloying, insincere sympathy over the past year. I called them one by one, playing the part of the slightly confused, grieving mother. "Oh, Susan, it's Francine," I'd say to one of Danielle's closest friends. "I'm just trying to get Danielle's medical papers in order for the new insurance forms, and I'm so muddled. Do you happen to remember the name of that wonderful holistic retreat in Arizona she went to? She said you recommended it." Susan, caught off guard, would stammer, "Oh, Francine, yes, the Serenity Spa retreat. We had a marvelous time." Danielle looked so relaxed. A spa retreat, not a clinic. I made a quiet note of every detail. I did the same with their other friends, piecing together their real itinerary from their careless recollections. The specialist consultation in Germany had been a Christmas market tour. The experimental therapy in Mexico was, in fact, an all-inclusive stay at a 5-star resort in Cancun. They hadn't even bothered to be particularly creative with their lies. Their arrogance, their belief in my gullibility had made them sloppy. Marcus Thorne, my investigator, was a marvel. He uncovered the shell company Terrell had set up to funnel my money into, a company with a name like Global Health Solutions, whose only asset was a post office box address. He found records of the new luxury car Terrell had purchased, the down payment on the chic downtown condo they had bought, all timed perfectly with my largest investment in Danielle's treatment. The final, most devastating piece of the puzzle came from a source I hadn't anticipated, but one my career had made me intimately familiar with: the Central Medical Records System. I still had contacts from my decades of processing claims, old acquaintances in the billing and records departments. I called an old friend, Eleanor, the head of medical records at a major regional hospital. I asked her as a personal favor to do a quiet, off-the-record search. "Eleanor," I'd said, "this is a strange request. But could you see if my daughter, Danielle Cross, has had any recent oncology reports or diagnoses filed with the National Cancer Registry?" Her supposed doctor was a Dr. Alastair Finch. Eleanor called me back an hour later, her voice grim. "Francine," she said, "there is no Dr. Alastair Finch registered in this state or any neighboring state. And more importantly, there are absolutely no oncology records for a Danielle Cross anywhere in the national database. According to this, your daughter is as healthy as you or I." There was the final, undeniable confirmation. It wasn't just that the treatments were fake. The disease itself was a lie. A monstrous, year-long performance designed to defraud her own mother. With this final piece of evidence, my case was complete. I had a mountain of it: financial records, witness statements from their own friends confirming their luxury travel, proof that the clinics and doctors were non-existent, and now confirmation from the National Medical Database that Danielle had never, ever been diagnosed with cancer. I met with Marcus Thorne one last time. He handed me a thick dossier, a complete, damning narrative of my daughter and son-in-law's monstrous fraud. "They are amateurs, Francine," he said with a grim shake of his head. "Arrogant, cruel, but ultimately sloppy amateurs. They never thought anyone would check. They certainly never thought that person would be you." I looked at the dossier, at the cold, hard proof of their betrayal. The grief, the anger, it was all still there. But now it was tempered with a sense of steely, righteous purpose. They had written a fiction, a tragedy starring me as the grieving mother. Now I held the truth. And the truth was a weapon. The quiet investigation was over. It was time to write the final chapter of their story, a chapter that would end not with a tearful funeral, but with a cold, hard legal reckoning. The final stage of my plan required a performance of my own, one that would make my daughter's year-long portrayal of a cancer patient look like amateur theatrics. My grief for the daughter I had lost to her own monstrous greed was real and profound, but I now had to channel it, to weaponize it, to set the final, inescapable trap. I waited a week after receiving the complete dossier from my investigator, Marcus Thorne. Then I made the call to Danielle. I pitched my voice low, making it tremble with a carefully crafted despair. "Danielle, honey," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Mom. I need to see you. Both of you. It's important." They arrived at my small, now almost empty condo that evening, their faces arranged in masks of solemn concern. They had likely been expecting this call, the one where the terminal patient's mother finally breaks down. They probably thought I was going to talk about funeral arrangements, about final wishes. They had no idea I was about to orchestrate their own. I had set the stage. I was propped up in bed, a collection of pill bottles on my nightstand, mostly vitamins, but they didn't know that, looking as frail and as defeated as I possibly could. "Mama," Danielle began, rushing to my bedside, taking my hand in hers, her touch now feeling like a viper's. "What is it? You sound so weak." "The doctors called," I lied, letting a single genuine tear of rage and sorrow trace a path down my cheek. There's nothing more they can do for you, my baby. The treatments, they didn't work." I broke down into a series of practiced, heartbreaking sobs. Terrell, my son-in-law, the co-architect of this entire grotesque charade, put a comforting arm around Danielle's shoulders, his own expression a perfect caricature of grief. "Oh, Francine," he said, his voice thick with false emotion. "We knew this day might come. We are so sorry." They thought they were at the finish line, about to collect the final prize. There's one last thing," I said, my voice a ragged whisper. "My savings, they're all gone, as you know. All of it went to your treatments, but I have my final pension payout. And my life insurance policy. It's not much, but I want you to have it, Danielle. For your final comfort care. To make your last days as peaceful as possible." I saw a flicker of triumphant, ghoulish greed in their eyes, quickly masked by performative sorrow. This was it. The final payout. The last drop of blood from the stone they had so patiently been bleeding. "Oh, Mama, no," Danielle wept, though her eyes were dry. "You shouldn't." "I insist," I said firmly. "But there are tax implications. Legal things. Terrell, you understand these matters." I gestured to a folder on my dresser. "My lawyer, Mr. Finch, he drew up some final papers. To transfer the last of my assets into a trust for Danielle's care. He said it would be cleaner that way. Simpler for everyone after you're gone, my dear." Terrell, ever the pragmatist, retrieved the folder. He glanced through the documents, his expression one of professional concentration. They were simple asset transfer forms, just as I'd described. He nodded. "Yes, this makes sense, Francine. It's a wise move. They thought I was handing them the last of my money. They thought they were witnessing the final act of a gullible, heartbroken mother. They signed the papers where indicated. And then I delivered the final, fatal lie. There's one more thing," I said, my voice barely audible. "The insurance company, and the bank, for the estate, they will need official documentation. After the end." I looked at Terrell, my eyes pleading. "I know this is a terrible thing to ask, Terrell, but I won't be able to handle it. And I don't want to burden anyone else. My final wish is for you to handle the final paperwork for me." He looked at me confused. "What paperwork, Francine?" I took a deep breath. "The death certificate," I whispered, "for Danielle. When the time comes." I pushed another separate document towards him, one I had downloaded from the county clerk's website, a blank certificate of death. If you could just help me fill it out now with what we know, it would give me such peace of mind knowing it was all taken care of." It was a monstrous, bizarre request. But they were so close to the finish line, so blinded by their greed, so convinced of my impending demise and my grief-addled state of mind, that they didn't see the trap. They saw it as the final macabre request of a dying woman, a small, strange task to complete before they could claim their prize. Terrell, with a look of grim resignation, took the form and began to fill it out, listing a fictitious cause of death, a future date. They left that night with signed asset transfer documents and a partially completed fraudulent death certificate, believing they had just orchestrated the final, successful stage of their year-long con. They had no idea that they hadn't just taken my money. They had just handed me the keys to their own prison. The stage was set. The evidence was secured. My funeral for my daughter's fictional life was about to become very, very real for them. The days after my children left my apartment, armed with what they believed was the final key to my fortune, were the quietest, most deliberate of my life. The performance was over. The grief, the weakness, the confusion, all the roles I had so convincingly played were packed away. What remained was Francine Butler, the insurance claims adjuster, the woman who knew that the most devastating blows are delivered not with emotional fury, but with the cold, irrefutable logic of a well-documented paper trail. I did not go to the local police. A local detective might be swayed by my grieving son-in-law, might see it as a messy family dispute. My target was an authority far more powerful, far more relentless, and far less susceptible to emotional manipulation: the Internal Revenue Service. I spent 2 days in my home office, which was now my command center, meticulously preparing my final claim. It was the most important case of my career. The centerpiece was a formal, heartbreakingly composed letter. I wrote it from the perspective of a grieving, recently bereaved mother trying to settle her daughter's final affairs. To whom it may concern, it began. My name is Francine Butler, and it is with the heaviest of hearts that I write to you today. My beloved daughter, Danielle Cross, has tragically passed away after a long and courageous battle with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. Over the past year, her illness incurred staggering medical expenses, for which I, her mother, provided the funding from my life savings. I continued, my words a masterpiece of sorrowful fiction built upon the foundation of their lies. I detailed the experimental treatments, the out-of-state specialists, the holistic care. Then came the crucial part. In settling her final estate, I wrote, I have been left with a series of complex financial questions regarding these massive medical expenditures. I wish to ensure that all of my late daughter's tax affairs are handled with the utmost integrity and in full compliance with the law. I have enclosed copies of all the medical invoices and receipts for her year-long treatment, totaling several $100,000. I have also enclosed a copy of her death certificate for your records. I would be profoundly grateful for your guidance on how to properly account for these expenses in relation to her final tax return and my own financial situation. The package was a work of art. It contained every single fraudulent invoice Terrell and Danielle had created. It contained copies of my own bank statements, showing the huge sums transferred out of my accounts for these treatments. And nestled on top, the centerpiece of my trap, the death certificate now looking chillingly official, the one Terrell had so foolishly, so greedily helped me prepare. I didn't mail it. This was a package that required a verifiable delivery. I sent it via a bonded courier to the regional headquarters of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, addressed to the head of the department. Then I waited. The response was not immediate, but when it came, it was decisive. About a month later, I received a discreet call from a special agent from the IRS. He was polite, professional, and very, very serious. He wanted to meet. We met at a neutral location, a quiet library meeting room. I told him my full, unvarnished story, this time without the pretense of the grieving mother. I told him my daughter was very much alive. I explained the year-long scam, the gaslighting, the theft of my life savings. I explained that the documents I had sent them were fraudulent, created by my daughter and son-in-law to exploit me. The agent listened, his expression a mixture of grim fascination and cold, professional anger. I had, he explained, handed them a perfect, self-contained case of large-scale tax fraud and conspiracy. My letter and the fake death certificate had triggered an immediate high-level investigation. Their system had flagged Danielle Cross as deceased, while her social security number was still very much active, and her financial footprint, the new condo, the luxury car, all bought with my untaxed gift money, was a blaring siren of undeclared income. The IRS, unlike a local police department, does not knock politely. They descend. I heard later that 2 very serious-looking agents had appeared at Danielle and Terrell's new luxury condo at dawn. They weren't there to offer condolences. They were there with a warrant to seize financial records. The fallout was catastrophic for them. They were caught in an inescapable bureaucratic nightmare of their own making. They were facing a federal investigation for tax evasion, conspiracy, and wire fraud. Their bank accounts were frozen, their new car seized, a lien placed on their condo. The inheritance they had stolen from me was now being methodically dismantled by the most powerful collection agency on the planet. They tried to blame me, of course. They told the investigators I was a senile old woman who had misunderstood, who had maliciously filed false documents. But my own meticulous records, my testimony as a clear-minded retired insurance professional, and the sheer brazen stupidity of their own paper trail, made their lies fall apart under federal scrutiny. My revenge was complete. It was quiet, devastatingly intelligent, and absolute. I didn't get my money back, not directly. But I didn't need it. My victory was in knowing that every time they had to meet with an IRS agent, every time they had to fill out another terrifying legal form, every time they looked at their ruined finances, they would think of me. They would think of the mother they had so cruelly underestimated. I had paid for my daughter's fake funeral, all right. I had paid for it with my life savings. And in return, I had buried her and her husband under a mountain of federal charges from which they would likely never emerge. My final claim had been filed, and this time the payout was justice.